So I just got back a little while ago from seeing The Hobbit, The Battle of the Five Armies. Now, is it a good movie? Yes, definitely. Is it a great movie? Yes, I would say it's a great movie. Now, is it a perfect movie? I don't think I'd go that far. It definitely does have its flaws. But, I kind of wanted to cover the movie as a whole, the good and the bad. Now, for those who may or may not know, I am a huge fan of The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, basically the whole Middle-earth storyline. I got into it from watching The Fellowship of the Ring, and then after that my folks gave me a set of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. And I started reading them, and I just got hooked. So I was definitely looking forward to the rest of the movies. And then I found myself wanting to read The Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, all of that. I ended up getting sucked into the world of Middle-earth, for better or for worse. Now, still, with that in mind, I'm going to try to look at this movie from a totally non-biased standpoint and kind of let you judge for yourself based on what I've got to say about it. Now, if you've seen the first two movies, you know it's basically about Bilbo and a company of dwarves making their way up to Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, to try to reclaim it from Smaug the Dragon. And, as you've probably seen from watching the first two, it does a pretty good job of following along that storyline. But what I like is that they also took elements from some of Tolkien's other works, especially the Unfinished Tales, and kind of, I don't want to say they padded it out, but it does kind of help to flesh out some of the events that were also taking place during that time. And while I hated some of the things that they changed around for the Lord of the Rings movies, especially in The Two Towers and Return of the King, as a whole, I'd find that pretty much all of the changes that they made in The Hobbit, and especially in this one, actually, for the most part, ended up working with the movie. Now, when we last left our intrepid company at the end of The Desolation of Smaug, they made it to the mountain, had their big encounter with Smaug the Dragon, managed to severely cheese him off, and send him going off after Lake Town. And that is where the Battle of the Five Armies begins. It's at night. Smaug's flying in Lake Town, breathing fire, setting the whole place on fire. And we see Tauriel. Why she's in this book, I don't know, but, not the book, but the movie, but, I didn't write the movie, so. Anyways, she and some of the dwarves are making their way out of Lake Town. Everybody's trying to evacuate. The Master and his flunkies are basically trying to haul as much gold as they can onto one of their boats. Meanwhile, Bard is... He's trying to break out of prison, which he does in actually a pretty funny sequence where he takes the rope, throws it around the Master's neck, and catches him, and basically, while they're trying to row the Master's boat, it basically yanks the whole wall out of Bard's jail cell. I don't know why. I found that trick actually pretty amusing. So, after he gets free, he is trying to make his way through the town, and he gets up to this bell tower, and he starts firing arrows at Smaug the Dragon. Apparently he actually gets a couple of hits, but nothing that's going to actually do anything. He's pretty much basically firing peas at a dragon out of his bow, which, there are you know what I'm saying, but it just doesn't work. And they point out that he doesn't have anything that can pierce Smaug's hide. So his son basically gets the idea to take this iron black arrow that you see mentioned in the second movie, and where he picks it up from, I don't know, but he ends up getting up to the watchtower, and Smaug sees them, and basically attacks the tower, sends it all rocking back and forth, and Bard's bow breaks. How's that for a tongue twister? Bard's bow breaks. So, but Bard, he's a resourceful one, and he basically ends up wedging the pieces of his bow into some of the spots on the tower, and he actually uses his own son as a sight. Now, he didn't do that in the books, I'm fairly sure, but it actually kind of worked in this one. He was telling his son, "All right, move over to the right a little bit, a little to the left, perfect," and basically shoots the arrow. His shoulder hits his dragon, and Smaug's dead. Now, I've heard complaints that they kind of screwed Smaug over, but if you're reading the books, that's pretty well accurate to how it goes. I mean, they were at that part in the book, so sorry, Smaug, but you gotta die. Now, with Smaug dead, this doesn't really solve anything. It just brings up a whole other set of problems. Because now we have a few dwarves in a mountain, and everybody, for whatever reason or another, like, hey, the treasure is defenseless. Let's all go after it. Now, actually, that's kind of somewhat simplifying it a little bit. Not a whole lot, though, because the dwarves, they're celebrating like, oh my god, somebody actually killed Smaug. Except for Thorin, who, it turns out that he's suffering from what's called the dragon sickness, where apparently, I mean, yeah, this does have a basis in Tolkien's writing, where dragons, they can sort of put a curse on certain items, which apparently Smaug did with his whole treasure, and it starts to get to Thorin, and basically he starts getting really greedy and obsessed with finding the Arkenstone. And he has the dwarves going after it pretty much day and night, trying to search the treasure room, trying to find it. And it actually ends up being his main struggle throughout a lot of the movie. Now, back over to Lake Town. It's daytime now, and they're starting to pull people out of the water and trying to regather everybody and everything. Now, after this guy, Alfred, who was basically the Master's head flunky, who the Master actually threw out of the boat at one point to try to lighten the load so that they get out faster, which, by the way, didn't work. The Master found out that when you're trying to escape, you do not bring gold with you. That is pretty much asking for trouble. Because when Bard shot Smaug, it's like, here is the Master's boat. Here's Smaug. Yeah, you kind of see that coming. So, anyways, I guess, getting thrown out of the boat ended up saving the guy's life. But I wish it didn't, because this guy is one of the most annoying characters in the whole series. There's a parts where you end up wishing that he would get shot or stabbed. But little spoiler here, he never does. Last time that we see him, he ends up taking off with a whole dress full of gold. Yes, I said a dress full of gold. Trust me, if you see the movie, it makes sense. But anyways, so that's beside the point. Now, Bard, he's basically, because he was the one that killed Smaug, and I guess everybody really likes him, he's basically chosen to be the leader of the town. So he starts gathering everybody up, having them gather what supplies they can get their hands on. And they make their way up to the city of Dale to be able to talk to the dwarves. And the girl's like, hey, you promised us that you were going to help us out with the whole dragon thing. So, how about, paying up on that? But, of course, Thorin, who is under the aforementioned dragon's curse, basically tells him, you know what? No, it's my gold. Screw you. Go away. Now, of course, what I forgot to mention at this point, too, is that when they get to Dale, they're cold, hungry, thirsty. They didn't really have very many supplies with them. When, guess who comes over but Thranduil and the elves of Mirkwood. Now, first, Bard's all like, oh, thank you, I don't know how to repay you. And Thranduil's like, you know what, I didn't do this for you. I got some of my own treasure in that place. I want it back. How the elvish treasure ended up under there, I don't know. It's never really addressed in the movie, and it only shows up in like one scene. So, I don't know. But anyway, so now you got men and elves, basically both marching on the mountain. Yeah, this mountain ends up being very important to pretty much everybody and their mother throughout this movie. But yeah, so Thorin sees all the elves over there, and like I said, tells Bard to basically saw it off. So Thranduil's like, well, we tried. We march at dawn. So Bilbo, okay, as you may have seen during the second movie, when Bilbo ran into Smaug, he finds the Arkenstone, this glowing, hand-sized rock that Thorin's been after from the get-go, and he decides to stash it in his coat for himself. Why? At this point in the movie, I don't know. I really don't know what Bilbo was thinking on that one. He would have figured that this is what the guy that hired you has been after. Why don't you give it to him? This was before he started going all gold crazy. But anyways, so Thorin, he ends up, like I say, he's obsessed with finding the Arkenstone. He's got everybody tearing after it. He starts getting all paranoid and all that, wondering where it is, if anybody's taking it. And Bilbo's just all like, no, it wasn't me, really, it wasn't me. And so, and at some point, he even has a conversation with Balin, one of the other dwarves, like, this is really weird. Like, would it make him feel better if he had the Arkenstone? And Balin, who's basically Thorin's best friend throughout the whole thing, is like, no, that treasure is cursed. If he had the stone, it would just make him even crazier. So Bilbo decides to stash it for himself. Now, while all this is going on, we have another storyline going where Gandalf is being held captive in Dol Guldur, and Gandalf and Radagast both, I believe. Now, one of the orcs comes along, and he basically wants to kill Gandalf. When, okay, this is a pretty choice sequence, I'll admit. Galadriel, of all people, just comes walking right into the middle of Dol Guldur and blasts the orc, frees Gandalf, and they start making their way out when the Nazgul show up. Yeah, at this point, though, they're not in their black cloaked, armored outfits. They're actually in their glowing ghost forms, and it looks like they're going to attack when all of a sudden Saruman and Elrond show up, and the two of them together basically proceed to wipe the floor with the Nazgul. Yeah, these Nazgul were seen as one of the ultimate threats throughout the Lord of the Rings, and In this movie, they get their asses handed to them by a wizard and an elf. At this point, they probably should have just send them out after Saruman all his own. But anyway, so after they beat the Nazgul, we find out that the dreaded necromancer is none other than Sauron himself, who, in an explosion of rock from one of these towers, appears as the big floating red eye with a silhouette of his old armored self in the pupil of it, which admittedly looks pretty cool. But then Galadriel somehow, she gets up and she's turns into, I don't really know how to put it. I don't want to say she went Super Saiyan or anything, but she starts glowing, kind of like in that one scene in Fellowship of the Ring, and basically calls out Sauron saying, "You are powerless, you are formless, you are nameless," all that stuff. And somehow she, by herself, manages to banish Sauron and the Nazgul and send them off over to Mordor. Of course, that pretty much uses up a lot of the energy that they have at the moment. So they end up leaving from there. But, I mean, I don't know what I was expecting when I read about what would happen when they go to the to Dol Guldur. I don't know if that was quite what I had in mind, but yeah, for the most part, it works. Like I said, I've never really been a big fan of Sauron not having any kind of body, like the big floating eye thing. Because in the books, it actually basically states that Sauron, he has a body, he just doesn't want to leave the tower until he gets the ring back and all of his power and all that. So, I don't really know what they were thinking with that one, but that's beside the point. So, anyways, so back over to the mountain. We also find the while everything's been going on, there's just like so many different fronts that stuff's been happening on. I'm having a hard time trying to decide which one to talk about first, because you've got along with the human elf dwarf drama, you also have Azog and the orcs getting ready to attack the mountain as well. And Azog has a conversation with Bolg, who is, I guess it turns out is his kid, to go to our fortress in Gundabad and summon the orcs there. We get ready to march on the mountain ourselves. Now, one thing I did think was kind of cool is, in the first couple movies, Azog, instead of his arm here, he'd had a pitchfork thing. But now he has what actually looks like a really cool sword arm. I really like the look of that one. So, anyway, so they're getting ready to march on now. So now we've got humans, we got elves, we've got the dwarves, we've got the orcs. This really is going to be a battle of 5 armies. Everybody in there for their own reasons. So, anyway, so they're getting ready to march. And Bold gets there and it's like, ha ha ha. Those humans and those elves, they forget what lives under the earth. And they start, there ends up being this earthquaking stuff, and I was like, okay, I don't know what's going to be there, but I know it's going to be something big. And it is, as we'll find out. So, while this is going on, Bilbo, Bilbo gets the weird idea of hopping off down, rappelling down out of Erebor, and making his way to Dale, and he ends up having a conversation with Thranduil Bard and Gandalf, who's shown up at that point. And, like, you know, we don't have to go to war over this. Just, you know, offer him this. And he holds up the Arkenstone. And everybody's like, ooh, yes, we can use this now. It's funny. Everybody talks about what a good friend Bilbo is. Bilbo, the friend who will steal your most valuable treasure. And have somebody else offer it back to you. Anyways, so they take the Arkenstone, and they're like, hey, we'll give this back, but we want you to hold your word and give us some gold so we can resettle again. Now, I've really got to wonder here why the humans are so. Why they're after the gold exactly? I mean, if I were them, I'd be like, you know, the dwarves are great at building stuff. Maybe they can help us rebuild our town. And that's why I would have asked them. I wouldn't have gone like, yeah, can you guys give us some gold, please? You know, so I don't know. That's just me, but the gold seems to be the big thing right now that everybody's after. So. So anyway, so Thorin's like, at first he doesn't believe that's the real Arkenstone. He's like, no, the Arkenstone is buried in the mountain. And they think that, I mean, he thinks that, yeah, it is there, but then Bilbo goes, no, it's not. I stole it. I stole it, gave it to them. And Thorin, he gets pissed, alright? He grabs Bilbo, and he acts like he's going to throw him over the tower, the wall where Erebor. And he probably would have, except for Gandalf's like, if you are not satisfied with my thief, then please return him to me undamaged. So they basically let Bilbo leave Erebor back over the same rope that he left before. And he ends up meeting up with Gandalf and goes to hang out over in Dale while things are going on. So, now, we got everybody, though, now at this point, moving in and getting ready to attack the mountain. You end up having the humans and the elves on one side. When they're getting ready to attack, though, apparently at some point, Thorin had managed to get a hold of a raven and sent him to his cousin Dane's fortress somewhere in the Iron Hills. We never actually see him make the call or anything. So I have no idea when he told Dane, yeah, I'm gonna need your army over here. But somehow he managed to get home. So now we do have an army of dwarves outside the walls, as well as the few dwarves inside the city, inside Erebor. So we've got humans, elves, and dwarves outside. Then the orcs show up. And this is all just starting to turn into one big clusterfuck at this point. Because the orcs come down, and the dwarves start fighting them off first. And everybody's looking at Thranduil like, well, aren't you going to send the elves out too? And after a little while, he does end up doing that. So then we've got elves and dwarves fighting orcs. Then the humans are like, you know what, we're going to go back to the city now. Except a bunch of orcs start attacking there too. Now, there was one cool scene in this movie where the earthquakes I had mentioned earlier from Gundabad, like the ground starts shaking there, and out come these giant worms that basically, they look like the worms from Dune on steroids. Now, except they show up to, dig a bunch of tunnels and then pop up, and they are never seen again for the whole rest of the movie. I'm thinking, wouldn't you want to lead off with the giant death worms? But I don't know. I'm hoping that these things show up more during the extended edition, because it just seems weird to just like have them pop up and like, bye. But that's just me. So anyway, so now we've got fights going on two fronts, and then inside the inside Erebor, the mountain, Thorin's getting all paranoid, and he's like, "We have to take the gold further underground," and everybody's telling him like, "Dude, is the gold all you care about now?" And after being called out by Dwalin, I think it is, we see Thorin walking down this golden hallway, and he ends up having what I can only describe as a really weird acid trip, where he starts hearing the voices of everybody telling him what an idiot he's being, and he hallucinates himself basically sinking into like a gold whirlpool thing. And then that cuts away and we just see him standing there. Now, although after that scene, there is a cool moment where we see the dwarves all just sitting around. Like, all through this movie, they've wanted to go out and fight alongside the other dwarves, but Thorin's just been like, "No, we must stay here." But finally we see Thorin walking out, and Keely's like, "I can't just stand here. It's not my blood." And Thorin finally wises up. It's like, "No, you're right. It's not. We are Durin's folk, and Durin's folk never run away from a fight." So then they come out. We see these 13 dwarves just march in, and they just start kicking ass right and left, killing orcs, and they end up meeting up with the Dane's company, which Dane, he's an interesting character in himself, because he shows up with his company of dwarves and he basically tells everybody, it's like, "Everybody, I want you all to sod off now." Yes, he actually tells the king of the elves to sod off. But then when I found out that he was played by Billy Connolly, I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm not really surprised. But it is a hilarious intro for him. But anyway, so he and Thorin and pretty much all the dwarves are beating up orcs right and left. And then I'm trying to think here. Of course, it's still not enough because there are a ton of orcs out there and not that many dwarves. Even with the which actually that brings me back to another cool sequence where the dwarves first start fighting. They start like getting in front of everybody, like when the orcs show up, and the dwarves start making this really big this shield wall. And this is when Thranduil will decide, you know what, we're gonna fight too. And he basically has a lot of his soldiers run up and jump over the shield wall and start killing orcs right and left. I just imagine what the dwarfs in the front of that line probably thought, like, "Hey, what gives? What are you jumping on my head for?" But yeah. So yeah. Anyway, so pretty much the dwarves are the main ones doing any fighting out there. At this point, the humans and the elves have ended up in doing a lot of fighting over in Dale, and ends up. It reminds me a lot of the in Helm's Deep, when in the Two Towers, when a lot of the orcs started pouring in and they start hiding people in the Great Hall. When they get the idea of hiding the women, the children, and the sleazebag Alfred sneaks in. to the Great Hall to try to bar it shut and keep people there while the men do the fighting. But so that's all going on. But there's a really cool scene where Thranduil he's riding this giant deer with these big ass antlers, and there's a really cool scene where he's riding along, and his antlers just like start spearing orcs right and left, and you got like this whole line of orcs on the deer antlers, and Thranduil just swings his sword and beheads them all at once, and it looks pretty awesome. Except then, I don't know what happened, like if somebody shot the deer or if he just like crashed into the doorway and stuff. But then you see Thranduil just like rolling along the ground, and he ends up right in the middle of a bunch of orcs. And he's like, "All right, fine." He gets up and he ends up pulling two swords out. I swear, I'm starting to think that dual wield must be. It must be genetic on all elves, whether it be Dungeons and Dragons, Lord of the Rings, what have you. All elves seem to know how to dual wield. So he's taking two swords and he's spinning around, killing orcs right and left. And it looks like things are going well there. Except later on, he starts finding out that a lot of his elves are getting killed. So he starts calling for any remaining elf troopers to regroup, and they start making their way out of the city. When they end up running into Toriel and Legolas, who try to get him to not go, and they find because they actually went and spied on the orcs coming out of Gundabad, and told him, "Look, dude, there's another army of orcs coming." Now, I don't know whether to count these orcs as they refer to it as another army. Whether to count them with the first ones with the first army of orcs or what. I'm trying to figure out if there's really a battle of 5 armies or not. But anyways, so they start showing up, and while this is going on, I should backtrack a little bit here. Because when Thorin and his dwarves came out, they realized, you know what? We need to go up to this mountain. We need to find where Azog is. We need to take him out. If we take down the leader, they'll probably run. So Thorin, Fili, and Kili, along with Dwalin, separate from the others, and they start making their way up the mountain, killing orcs right and left. And yeah, I mean, if you read the books, you probably know where this is going to be going. If not, then I'll get to it. So, anyways, back to the scene with the elves. They let Thranduil know that there's another company coming from the north, and it was like, which way is north? And they're like, Ravenhill, where Azog is. And then everybody just gets this, oh shit look on their faces when they realize that's where Thorin and the others are. So Bilbo volunteers to go warn them, and Gandalf's like, no way, they'll see you. And Bilbo's like, trust me, they won't see me. So he ends up taking off, using the ring, of course. Now, at this point in the movie, I've really got to wonder. Sauron's power is tied to the ring, and granted, I know the real world. The reason is because Tolkien probably hadn't come up with that part yet. But how come Sauron never saw it when Bilbo puts on the ring? I don't know. But anyway, so he goes up to Ravenhill, and he actually managed to dispatch a few orcs himself. So, but he gets there, and the dwarves get there and find that Azog's disappeared. So Feely and Keely end up going off to try to find where the orcs have went. And this is a funny scene, though, where a bunch of orcs plan to, like, they end up ambushing them and ambushing Thorn and Dwellin. They're like, oh, it's only 100 of them. We can take that. And I was like, only 100. Yeah. So they're fighting the only 100 orcs, while Feely and Keely end up going to the trying to make their way up the towers on Raven Hill to find where the orcs are. And Feely, I think he is the one with the beard, ends up getting captured by Azog, and basically who calls Thorn out. It's like, your bloodline ends here. And we see him just kill Feely and just like toss him right over the side of the hill. And now this ends up pissing off Keely. At least I think it's Keely, the one with the with just a little 5 o'clock shadow going on. And he runs up and starts attacking orcs right and left. And Thorn's like, okay, now this is personal. And he ends up running over there, making his way up there. And, you know, okay, the movie, when you're watching it, you end up being able to follow everything pretty well, but it's not until you're actually sitting here trying to describe it to somebody that you realize just how jumbled up everything is. I mean, I'm trying to explain who went where when in this movie. But anyways, when because while this is going on too, when the elves found out about the army of orcs, Legolas and Tauriel were like, okay, we've got to help them too. So they're making their way to Raven Hill. And, you know, I get why he would be involved, but it's still really weird seeing Legolas in this movie, because he's never mentioned once in the book. I mean, yeah, it takes place where he lives, but still. So they're going on, and they end up getting separated by Legolas having to do his extremely cool stunts, where he grabs hold of this giant bat and flies over this tower, while Thorin's having this battle with a ton of orcs following with a battle against Azog. Now, so he's trying to help Thorin out by pulling out his bow and shooting a bunch of arrows at orcs like Legolas does. Meanwhile, Tauriel's looking for Keely, calling out to him, except she ends up getting ambushed by Bolg, and Keely ends up finding her and starts fighting with Bolg, and they end up basically taking turns fighting, getting knocked away, fighting, getting knocked away, until finally Bolg ends up grabbing Keely, bending him over his leg, and taking him with his mace. It's got a really sharp blade on it, and just stabs him right through. Which, you know, of course, Tauriel's just crushed from it. Which, you know, I'll admit, it was definitely a touching, really sad scene. I mean, I knew it was going to be coming somehow. I knew these dwarves had to die, but didn't know how they were going to do it. Yeah. So Tauriel, she ends up getting pissed off, and she basically comes up with an idea to try to suicide dive the two of them over this cliff, where they end up basically rolling down all these stairs there, and she ends up down for a while. And now Legolas, he sees her fighting with him, and he tries to pull out his bow, pull out an arrow, except one problem. He's out. Yes, apparently Legolas does, in fact, run out of arrows at some points. So, he ends up having to run and make his way. Okay, this is actually a somewhat of a cool trick, too. Where there's this orc that he has prosthetic maces, morning stars rather, for hands, and prosthetic maces for legs. It's pretty crazy looking, I will admit. Anyways, he's swinging his giant maces, boom, 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 on the tower, trying to knock it down. And Legolas jumps off the tower on top of the troll's head, and he basically manages to steer the troll into knocking the tower across this gap between where he is at and where Bolg and Toriel are at. And so he ends up trying to run across it. He ends up running into Bolg, and they're fighting along this tower bridge thing, knocking each other down different levels on the thing. And so, and it is a pretty cool looking fight, where like he's using one sword after taking one of his swords and having thrown it at an orc that was about to kill Thorin. So Thorin basically takes Legolas' sword, and he's going after Azog while this is going on. But I'll get back to him. Right now I'm on Legolas and Bolg, where they're fighting, and he ends up losing one of his swords, and he just smiles, pulls out his knives that he usually uses, and just starts going to town on the guy. And after some really interesting stunts, including one where parts of the tower are collapsing, and you see Legolas running along the along the bricks while they're falling to get back up to the bridge. Which, you know, if you can do that in real life, I gotta give you props. Anyways, he ends up doing some cool moves, like jumping and actually doing a Frankensteiner or Hurricane Rana, whatever you want to call it, wrapping his legs around Bolg's head, trying to pitch him off the tower that way. But Bolg ends up like climbing. They both end up climbing back up and fighting. And at some point, Legolas ends up on top of him and like stabs him through the head, and then kicks off and flips back onto the cliff. And then we see Bolg basically just collapse down through the bridge, and it just falls, and see like the whole bridge collapsing, and a big piece landing right on top of Bolg. I will admit I kind of laughed at that part. It was kind of funny to me. So now we've got Thorin fighting Azog, and this is a huge scene. Like they're fighting on this this frozen pond or lake or whatever, and Azog's got this huge rock wrapped in chain that he's swinging around like a morning star. Is like swinging all around trying to hit him, and of course, you know, when they're fighting on frozen water, somebody's going to end up falling through it, and it happens because at one point, Azog swings so much it starts busting all the ice. Like he and Thorin are fighting along this on this one floating sheet of ice, and I don't remember how, but Thorin actually managed to get the rock out of out of Azog's hand. And Thorin has also a really funny idea where he grabs the rock and he just throws it to Azog, and Azog's like, huh? And then he ends up, the piece of ice that he's on, which Thorin, by the way, stepped off of, just goes like this, and Azog, and at the time, I also found that one pretty humorous. But then we see Azog basically going along the water underneath. You think he's drowning, and Thorin's like looking down, following him. Except then you see Azog like closing his eyes, and then they shoot open again. This never means anything good. And he ends up taking his sword arm, basically like jabbing up and stabbing Thorin right through the foot, and then bursting up out of the ice. And he basically takes his actually I should be doing with this arm. This hand is basically taking his sword hand and trying to stab Thorin with it. And Thorin's doing, holding his hand like this, trying to block it, getting closer and closer. And he just stops and he lets Azog basically stab him right through. Then he takes his sword and stabs Azog right through. Ends up flipping on top of him. And takes the sword and just jabs it right through the ice, pinning him down. And Azog, after 3 movies, is finally dead. Then we see Thorin watching the whole battle going on. All the orcs have poured in, all the dwarves are there, all the elves and everything, they're all fighting. And then you see, at least I think it's about now, then you see the eagles. When they showed up in the picture to fight, I don't know. But the eagles come pouring in, they start like flying over whole waves of orcs and knocking them all down. And one of them basically uses Bjorn as a bomb, dropping him on the orcs. Bjorn changes in midair to his bear form, starts ripping through everything. And now, at this point, like at some point during this fight, Bilbo had gotten himself hit over the head by an orc and knocked out for most of it. But now he's waking up, and he sees Thorin, and the two of them have a really sad, touching moment where Thorin's like, you were right all along. Like, you did the right thing, and can you ever forgive me? And Bilbo's all like, don't say that. You're gonna be fine. When does anybody in these scenes ever end up being just fine? And this is no exception. And finally, Thorin just dies right there. Now, we're getting to the end parts of it. I'm trying to think of where to go first in this. Because we see Tauriel, who I thought they were going to end up killing her off. I really did. But no, she was alive. And we see her sitting and holding Keely's hand, mourning him and stuff. And, at one point earlier in the movie, she and Thranduil had the scene where Tauriel accused Thranduil of not having any love in him. And so, but then at this point she asks him, if this is love, why does it hurt so much? I don't want this. Why does it hurt so much? And all Thranduil could say is, because it's real. Well, the guy actually has a heart in him. He can actually feel something. But, so, while this is going on too, Thranduil and Legolas have a moment together where Legolas is like, I can't stay. I can't go back anymore, right? So Grendel's like, well, where are you gonna go? And Lego's like, I really don't know. So Thranduil tells him to go north to meet with the Dunedain. It's like, there's one over there I think you'd really get along with. A guy over there I think you'd make really good friends with. And he pretty much, and of course, as you'll see from the scene, he's talking about Aragorn. But he says, his name is something you'll have to discover for yourself. And Thranduil ends up having a scene also right before that, though, with him, where he says, your mother really loved you, more than anybody else. It's like, first I was ready to think of Thranduil as just this cold, stiff jackass, but now at the very last minute they show, like, okay, he does actually feel. So, like, that part's going on, and the elves are getting ready to have a, like, they're mourning Thorn, and they're going to have a feast in his honor. And this is when Bilbo and Gandalf decide to take their leave and make their way back to the Shire. And this is when Gandalf reveals that at some point he figured out that Bilbo had a magic ring. He doesn't know yet that it's the ring, he just knows it's a ring, one of the rings. And he tells him it's not to be used lightly. So, Bilbo comes back to the Shire, and there ends up being a really funny scene where he finds that people have been auctioning off his stuff while he was gone. I don't remember if that was from the books, but either way, I would not be happy if I found out that somebody did that while I was gone. But he ends up going back into Bag End, hanging up some stuff, and then we reach into his pocket. He reaches into his pocket and he pulls out the ring. And then it cuts back over to Fellowship of the Ring time, when we see the older Bilbo, played by Ian Holm, looking at the ring in that same pose. Rather cool little touch, I thought. And the scene where there's a knock on the door, he's like, we don't want A. And it's like, I don't have time for such and such. And Gandalf's like, what about very old friends? So Bilbo goes to greet Gandalf at the door. And last thing we see is the camera moving over to this hand-drawn map of the area around Erebor, Dale, Lake Town, Mirkwood, the whole area from The Hobbit. And from there, that's when the movie ends. But as it ends, we're greeted to a really touching song called The Last Goodbye, sung by none other than Pippin himself, Billy Boyd, as it starts showing hand-drawn pictures of the cast and the places from the whole Hobbit trilogy, and the way they did it was actually really cool. And if this ends up being the last movie set in Middle Earth, then it was definitely a really good way to go out, I think. Now, I have heard rumor, I haven't found out yet how true this is or not, that they might do movies of the Silmarillion, although that I really have no idea what they would do with it. If they would start with the Ainulindale, and then would they go all the way up to the end of the First Age? Would they carry it further and talk about the stories of Numenor? I have no idea. I mean, granted, in the Middle-earth universe, there is a lot more they can cover, but I'm not sure how well it would do as films. But for now, for what it is, I would say this is a really good way to say farewell to Middle-earth, whether it be for forever or just for the foreseeable future, few years. But, so, what do I think about the movie as a whole? Well, like I said, I mean, it has some flaws in it. Like, Oh, one thing I forgot to mention, okay? All this hubbub about the Arkenstone, and after the scene where they tried to use it as a bargaining chip, it never shows up again. I would have liked to have seen the conclusion of that, where they end up basically burying the Arkenstone along with Thorin, like what happens in the books. Just to kind of give a little bit of closure on that point. So yeah, I mean, there's that, and like I said, I hated how the weirworms, as they call them, just like showed up, made a big entrance, and did absolutely nothing. But other than that, I mean, I didn't really have any big problems with the movie. I would highly recommend it if you're a Tolkien fan at all. Whether or not you like the Lord of the Rings movies, say what you will about them, I would say check out the Hobbit movies, and especially this one in particular. It shows that when they really want to, they can capture the feel of the world of Middle Earth. So, I mean, if it's still showing in your theater, I say stop listening to me, go out there and go see it for yourself. So, that's all I've really got to say about that. So, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.